I have done a version of this video twice now, and both versions of the video were like half an hour long. So this is actually a very long topic. And both videos I had to scrap because I got new information after the fact that made me go, okay, well, I kind of need to include that, or I kind of need to say something about that. And then this last time in particular, I was shown a book by someone called Writing Romance Fiction for Love and Money, which was published in 1983. At the same time that this was happening, all of a sudden, the topic of like gooning in literature and porn in literature and all that stuff, right? Suddenly like blew up. I saw several videos that had hundreds of thousands of views on it that I was like thinking of clicking, but I'm like, there's nothing in that video that they're gonna tell me. And then Shoe on Head, who's a very popular YouTuber, also did a video on it. And I haven't watched her video yet, but I kind of went, I can kind of guess where it's gonna go because I've seen other Shoe on Head videos. And my guess is it's not actually going to get at the heart of the matter. It's going to say something about, potentially say something about feminism and women today and whatever. It's not really... Okay, so this is actually a problem that goes way, way, way back. And that was the interesting thing about writing romance fiction for love, for money and profit, whatever it was. For love and profit. For love and money. That was, I read the introduction and I read the first chapter and I went, okay, this is a template on how to ruin the book industry. And they succeeded. And so I started to craft a timeline. I started thinking about all the romance novels I've read over the years. I started looking at their publication dates. I started tracking it and thinking about it, and I have a conspiracy theory about it, which comes down to what inevitably comes down to when you write porn, or when porn happens, is that at first it's shocking when you show anything, right? You show... so this is something that people have tracked with, like, not the OnlyFans. Before the OnlyFans, there was the cosplay community, where a bunch of girls would cosplay as these characters from video games and go to conventions and dress up as them. And they would always, you know, at first it was like, oh, we're just going to be like Mary Jane from Spider-Man or something. And then they would slowly start to do more scandalous cosplays. So, you know, when people were complaining about all the sex in video games, they would pick those girls to cosplay. Lots of lingerie, and then they would start to like ditch the cosplay entirely and start doing lingerie shoots. And then as the attention, so they would get a lot of attention and then it would start to wane, and then we get a lot of attention and then it would start to wane. And as each iteration of it, you know, that roller coaster as it were, eventually it would lead to full-on nudity. And last I heard, several of them were doing softcore porn, and semi-drawing the line at hardcore. The other example would be, if anyone remembers Belle Delphine, where, you know, she sold her bathwater and that was huge. And then the minute she released her sex tape, she dove off a cliff. Like, no one's heard of her since. It's that effect. It's the, you can only have, like, there's the initial shock and scandal, and then the views dissipate as people are less shocked and scandalized, right? And I believe that's what was happening with the romance genre in the 70s. And what it was is like in the 50s and 60s, you had romance books. They were very popular among women. And the books often dealt with so manly men coming back from war, so soldiers, doctors, even like policemen and firefighters. You know, like your what you envision as a like the most male-oriented role. And then it would have young female protagonists, usually virginal, who were like nurses or teachers or, you know, the girl next door. And these were very popular because the fantasy was like the really good girl getting the hunky doctor or whatever it was. And then with the sexual evolution of the 70s, the 60s and 70s, you suddenly got more explicit content in these books. And at first it was just like tits. It was just implying foreplay, or it was showing foreplay and implying sex. It was never full-on penetration until in the 70s that started to change. I mean, even in cinema that started to change, because you had your exploitation films, and the 70s was huge in the exploitation film industry. And it was the same with the books. Suddenly, there was a book I read so one of my favorite books ever is The Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery. And in the 70s, an Australian woman plagiarized it almost wholesale. Except she added a totally gratuitous, unnecessary, weird sex scene and changed the ending, so she got away with it. And that's what I would kind of like describe 70s romance porno fiction as, is weird kind of, you know, trying to see what you could get away with sex scenes. And in the 80s, they kind of perfected the model and they realized the market was huge and they just went, oh, wow, like there's serious money to be made. I mean, some of the numbers that were touted around in this book, I was like, that is crazy for an untested author to get, like, back then, if you were to write romance fiction, you could get an advance of $10,000, which this is 1980s money, and up to like a print run of 300,000 copies, depending how good this was. That is crazy, because I've looked into print numbers, and we will get back to that. But there is a lot of interesting information about print numbers themselves and what they say about what the publishers think is going to happen with your books. Now, and the other thing about this was she was touting, like, there were studies being done about what women wanted to see in their porn. And that's, at the end of the day, it was porn. And it became more and more scandalous. It became more and more intrusive, I'm going to call it. And eventually you got on to, like, full-on penetration. Depictions of it, at least. And it started to nosedive. And it did. And we know it did because what followed in the 90s and the 2000s was a little bit of a return to form. You had people like Nicholas Sparks was suddenly the most popular romance novelist. And I will do a video on Nicholas Sparks later, because there's a lot to say about Nicholas Sparks. But for now, I've read enough of his books to go, he doesn't really have sex scenes in his books. And then in the 2000s, there was like this huge thing about Christian romance novels and like Amish romance novels where you didn't really have porn in it at all. If anything, you had very, very questionable romantic liaisons. And then we come to Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey. So Twilight was really romance novels for teenagers. And you're gonna have to do a Twilight video too. Oh, lots of topics. But then 50 Shades of Grey went into territory that I don't think had really been explored up until that point. And especially because in the writing romance book, she makes the point of like almost smugly making this point of the quote. It was beautiful. It was love at first rape, and it was we're done with that. And the idea behind that was that they were done with the whole idea of the simpering, docile heroine who is just so blown over by the dashing hero, and he can do anything to her, and she loves him for it, right? She loves being dominated. And what's interesting about that is that was in the 80s when they were like, no, we are empowered women. We want our empowered sexual fantasies. Whereas you got to the 2010s and suddenly the biggest romance book ever is 50 Shades of Grey, which is questionable in many, many ways. And then you start to look at what was being written in the fan fiction world, and you start to see a lot of rape. I mean, a lot of it. And to the point where you get to a book that just came out called Alchemized. Now, I have referenced this book before, I just never said what the title was. And it came out back in September of 2025. And it is being touted as a Hermione and Draco romantic fan fiction. Hermione and Draco from Harry Potter. And which is interesting because, like, I asked a bunch of people if they had heard of this book, because this is the book that supposedly got a print run of 750,000 copies. No one had heard of it outside of one person who said she had seen it on Blue Sky being touted as the fan fiction. Now, J.K. Rowling is not likely to sue on this, but she does have a case to. So did Stephanie Myers with 50 Shades of Grey, and she, if I remember correctly, she chose not to, and that was a big thing back then. And that's kind of why they've been getting away with it for as long as they have, with these, like, fan fiction to legit books that, whatever, I'm okay with it if you can at least make an attempt to change what you're doing. The problem with Alchemized, though, is that it's not really a Harry Potter fanfiction. Yes, she used Draco and Hermione as her characters, but what she was really plagiarizing was The Handmaid's Tale. And what she was copying from there was, I guess she had either watched it or read it and saw the master and slave, sex slave relationship and went, yeah, that's hot. Let's make it romantic. Yeah, so I read a bit of the fan fiction. It's very long, and I read way too much of it for what it was worth. It was one of the more disturbing things I've read, and I've read some really, really disturbing erotica in my lifetime, but this really took the cake, mostly because how can you see that as a woman and go, I'm gonna romanticize that? And this is hard to explain, because I think we've all had rape fantasies. It is the #1 female fetish, according to, like, Pornhub and whatever. Women do have a rape fetish. And the main reason for that, as far as I can tell, is women like dominating men overwhelmingly. And so when the 80s romance novels changed the game and said the women have to be equal to the men have to be kind and caring and considerate, while that's sold because of the porn, it really died off fairly quickly. And in its place, most of the modern romance novels I've seen have some of the most toxic male archetypes I have ever read. I mean, you're talking like trying to meld like that dominating male archetype fantasy with kind and considerate, and you get absolute monsters in terms of maleness. They are like some of the worst, most, I don't know, like if I met these men in real life, I'd be so creeped out. These are like, if you know all like the men go their own way movement or the incel movement, this is what those men are, but hot. So that's our fantasy. It makes no sense. And it's disturbing. Like really, really disturbing. And it's honestly because, like, look, at the end of the day, women are the weaker sex. We just are. Like, it has nothing to do with mental capacity or anything. It has everything to do with the fact that we are just physically weaker. We are physically weaker because we are meant to bear children. That's what our bodies are built for. So we are not built to go out to fight and have wars and all that. We are built to stay home and have children. The men are built to fight for us and protect us. And we biologically look for men who can do that. Now, in the modern world, that can take on a lot of things. That can be a very wealthy provider. That can be someone who's good with their hands. That could be someone who is kind and compassionate in a way that is protective, right? But women do not like weak men because instinctually we know they can't protect us. And the men as depicted in these romance novels are weak. I mean, really, really weak, with this veneer of being strong. And women hate it deep down. They're not saying it, but it's true. The only reason they're engaging with it is it's porn. It just is porn, okay? It's porn. You're reading porn and pretending you're literary, right? But why the rape then? Because that's one way for the male to exert dominance, essentially. Or maybe the only way for the male to exert dominance? I don't know. This goes into other things about sexuality and stuff and the problems with that. Then I have a question of, why do women want porn like this? We don't see women engaging with porn to this level in the past. Not that they didn't, I'm sure they did. But what is going on? Now, partially it might be they didn't have access to the amount of porn we do now. They certainly weren't being given porn that was catered to them like it is now. But it also just says something about like a deep dissatisfaction that women seem to have with their lives, and in particular their sex lives. And this goes into something I've been thinking about for a while, which is are people having good sex, especially since the sexual revolution? Like, we keep saying, oh, you're liberated and you can have sex with whoever you want and it's going to be great. Except, overwhelmingly, I'm seeing more hardcore kink stuff to like get your juices flowing because the vanilla isn't working. And in fact, there's like, when I was in college, my friends were like vanilla shaming. It was like, oh, I just like to have sex without having to do a bunch of stuff, right? Oh no, that's vanilla. You don't understand. You're not having the best sex of your life. Trust me. And believe me, I've read a lot of sex books, and I've read a lot of intimacy books, and I've read a lot about this subject. And the thing that struck me, and actually the thing that worked in my own life, was going back to basics and leaning into the fact that I have a partner who knows me and I know him. And once I did that, once you open yourself up to the intimacy of knowing someone inside and out, quite literally, you open yourself up to actually really good sex. And so what my understanding, or what I have perceived after reading all this and reading all the studies and stuff, is that what tends to happen is that you have something like the butterfly effect, which is, you meet someone, you get these flutterings in your stomach, it's so exciting. The sex is exciting too because it's new and strange, and it's a little taboo too. The like, oh, I'm just gonna go to bed with someone, right? That's crazy. And that wears off. And that wears off real fast. Like within a couple months, if that. And then you're left with this not really knowing the person and feeling dissatisfied and mad that they keep like shoving their elbow in your side and like that's quite what I want you to do, and and it starts to not feel good. And then maybe you try to introduce toys, maybe you try to introduce new positions, and inevitably they don't work because outside of like the normal ones, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of like normal positions. Have you ever tried doing the more experimental ones? Like, ever tried to lift someone while doing that? And then add a few extra pounds on there. Because most people are not going to be like 110 pounds. They're going to start creeping up from 130 and upward, right? It doesn't work. Even very, very strong men have issues with it, okay? And it just adds to that dissatisfaction because suddenly like the more experimental things you're trying to do don't work and make you feel dissatisfied, and you start kind of blaming the partner and instead of, well, ultimately yourself. Because if you got to know your partner, it would feel so much better. And it does. And even the most vanilla, boring positions you can think of start to feel amazing when you know the person you're with. But with this sexual liberation and just have sex with whoever and have one night stands and you will feel empowered, women aren't getting to know the men they're with, and they're starting to feel dissatisfied because it's not an instantaneous, I feel good like I was promised on the tin. And the other side of this too is like, I've read some blogs by some like prominent BDSM people, and the thing that always strikes me about their thing is that it always sounds like they're using their partner as a toy. Like, it's interchangeable because they're a toy. It's all about their pleasure. And so, yeah, of course they have to do more extreme things with the toy because it starts to deaden. A lot of the really great sex you're going to have with a partner is because you're with a partner, and the dopamine and there's another word, I'm forgetting what it is, but point is, the hormones that pass between you is between you and the partner is like 50% of what sex is about, to be honest. Not just the position, not just, the orgasm. And so, because you also see this with watching porn, this is why, men have been talking about like erectile dysfunction problems, and even women are starting to have that, which is the more porn you consume, the first time it's exciting, and then the more you consume, the more extreme you have to look for to make it work. So that's what's going on right now. We've surpassed just the shock value of insertion. We need extreme, and now it's gone to the point of monster dick, which is like the ultimate dominating male fantasy, isn't it? It's just rape, and it really does belay the fact of like, hey, while it's great that we don't need to be shy about sex necessarily, or I should say we don't need to be prudish about sex, that doesn't change the fact that having copious amounts of sex with copious amounts of people that we don't know very well is A, not safe, and B, not fun. And you can get mad at me all you like, but that's the truth.